So, mate, how are you? What's going on?
I'm all right. I'm okay.
Yeah.
Lots going on in the world.
Keeping busy.
Keeping busy. Yeah. Domestically, lots happening. Internationally, of course, heaps happening.
Unbelievable, isn't it? Mate, it's all the talk, isn't it?
Exactly.
It is all the talk.
I think it's all the talk up in Queensland. Yeah, well, up in Queensland, it's Queensland elections and promises, and I'm going back to school. Free lunches are on.
Oh, yeah, good. Mate, I tell you what, only the state schools and only up and
Yeah. That's right. That's right. We're not going to look after the mix or anybody.
No, that's right.
The mix are on their own.
No, that's right. So what we'll do, we'll cut all funding for private schools, and we won't feed them. They don't need to eat. Yeah, potato. It's the great potato famine all over again.
That's right.
How good.
I might have to abandon my rosary beads and declare as a child of the state instead. Can you please feed me?
At least you'll get fed. Mate, I love
that's why I do the Oliver thing. Please, sir, I want some more.
I love the fact that kids in grade 7 and above don't get hungry. They don't need to eat. It's just add oil.
Right. Yeah. Hey? Let alone the fact that we could probably do with the money to, say, maybe, I don't know, fix the classrooms up.
Yeah.
Like so things like the infrastructure repairs and things like that. But
yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. But at least kind of cheap bus fares to get to school so they don't get
that's right.
in grade 7. And I'll tell you, some crazy policies or announcements or lack of announcements, I reckon, coming out of this particular campaign, unlike in the US.
Oh, yeah. Well, I know. I think there's plenty for us to chew on, both at the Queensland election, let alone the upcoming sort of federal election saga. There's plenty going on to make sure that all those inner city seats in Sydney and stuff are all lining up the way that this government would like them to be. But anyway, there we go.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. We're in the world of ill-advised speeches to UN General Assemblies and that sort of stuff, I think.
Right, what is with that?
Yeah, look, I'd have to say my view on that is, as I described, I think probably ill-advised. Look, the cynic in you would say, what's charging all the Labor talk at the moment and the announcements and even the decision-making is all centred around potentially next May or whenever that may be. For that election. That's a shame. Look, it's difficult enough for us to stand in front of the General Assembly with any sort of credibility as a nation in some respects, given our size and influence and all the rest of it. But notwithstanding that, the Foreign Minister's remarks and speech the other day were sort of perplexing, I've got to say, to be honest with you, sort of almost abandoning the sort of policy position, the sort of forcible establishment of the Palestine question and all that. Like, where did that just come from? So we abandoned the sort of the policy line that we've held in place for I don't know how many years. So it's forcible reunification. It's got a bit of a Taiwan twang to it. But gee whiz, I don't know, but that is a bit disturbing. So yeah. And apparently, if we can become good artists, we can describe whatever we do as something of significance and drive significant sort of investment, resourcing and infrastructure projects. I think we're missing our calling. There's lots of opportunities for us out there.
I'm going to do interpretive dance. I reckon I could contribute that way and get a grant.
That's right. What I've still got my crayon set. I think I might pull it out. I look at that mural. That's nowhere near some of my best work, I'm sure.
But mate, I remember we had a chat the other day, and you mentioned the fact that we just don't have a purpose or anything to believe in and belong to in this country. There's no North Star for us to go to get the population on board and go, yep, there's something we're going to strive for. I can see where this government's going. Let's all get on board. There's none of that.
Yeah. There was a thing in the military for a long time, particularly in Army, about the Australian way of fighting, right? And it characterised the way we approached, thought about, and executed warfighting, right? It's a similar concept what you're describing there. There was the Australian character, there was the Australian way of living, the way of doing things. And you're right, we seem to have, I think we've got an identity crisis in the country, as you described. The voice referendum nonsense, I think, was probably the most decisive or divisive event that's occurred in our country in the last few decades. It did everything that it purported it wouldn't be about. And even as late as this week, the stuff's starting to come to the surface again, because the protagonists have decided they actually still haven't. They're doing a Trumpism. They don't like the decision, so they're going to challenge it. But what it's showing, of course, is the deep-rooted discontent that still sits out there, the divisiveness that sits across the communities, sparked by the situation in the Middle East more so than anything else, and the lack of a government sort of settled, what I would call a settled policy setting being implemented and executed throughout. I think a tolerance for minority, outspoken, smaller groups and individuals, and an acceptance of behaviours that are just not behaviours that we should be accepting in our country. And as a consequence of that, they're fueling the sort of nasty behaviours and so forth that we're seeing, which is really, really divisive. And we're so focused on, in the Middle East question, we're so focused on an Israeli response as opposed to what started it in the first place in that particular incident. And a reminder for everybody that it's not all just about October 7 as the start. That was another event in that historical challenge that has been the situation over there. But of course, out of convenience, everybody wants to hone in on one side of the argument, which is, to me, predominantly about the response. And I think we could talk for some time about how I guess the question of enough is enough. Is enough now? And the collateral damage in terms of the Israeli military response and its actions and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's a bigger question than that. What triggered that in the first place? What's the history? What's been going on, at least up in the north of the country, with Hezbollah pushing back, Israeli settlers and citizens, and those sorts of things, and missile attacks that have been going on with almost no news coverage in the last 10, 12 months up there in the north, So it's not a case of taking sides, I guess. One shot is too much, arguably, in a humanitarian sense from any side. But it still perplexes me, the behaviours of people in this country who want to take the sides of, organisations and terrorist groups who have clearly demonstrated the behaviours and the actions that they will take to achieve their objectives. It's hard to fathom how we could, individually or collectively as a nation, accept and tolerate behaviours of people protesting for organisations who behaviours and actions and I guess policies, for whatever a better term, and beliefs are so at odds and are so abhorrent to us. And yet people, and I accept the right to protest and all the rest of it, but violent protesting and some of that stuff, it's really become quite nasty and concerning. But if you don't have a government that's got a grip, controlling the environment, I guess, and setting the tone in terms of how the country should behave and all the rest of it, then this is what we're going to get.
Yeah. Lee Kuan Yew mentioned something, the former Prime Minister of Singapore. There was a great interview with him talking about the rise of wokeism and what it will lead to. And this is a historic interview as well. And it's almost prophetic. It's all come true. And what happens to nations and to cultures when ideology is allowed to take over. So obviously ideology has driven a lot of behaviours, especially in the Middle East, for thousands of years. And that's the big difference in religion as well, about, when we talk about, what each belief is, and there's no right or wrong. This isn't about attacking any of the religions, but there are fundamental differences in what people who follow Christianity versus other religions, what they believe in and how they treat people. Christianity, as an example, is about inclusiveness. Other religions, not so much. And hence you can grab onto that ideology and let those who aren't as educated or as informed, such as in rural areas, in the Middle East, and people need something to believe to, and that's how extremism rises, right? People need, it's like gangs in Australia or the US or anywhere. People want to feel that they belong to something. It's just a human nature, and so that's how that rises. Be it Hezbollah, be it whoever it be, and then that it becomes real in their minds as well. Is that we're fighting for this cause because it's real. They don't understand the historical elements. And talking about the Middle East, that doesn't go back to World War II. That goes back much, much, much further.
Yeah, of course.
But it just seems I don't know how you overcome it. People have been trying to solve the issue in the Middle East for a long time, but I don't think any of those particular comments in the UN Assembly help either.
No. Look, I think there's a fundamental question domestically for us, of course, is, multiculturalism is arguably about inclusiveness, right? So this country has, for some decades, embraced multiculturalism. So we've embraced various cultures to come into this country, and it's made it the country that it is, right? And the fact that we have an incredible diversity in terms of cuisines and so forth, which we enjoy because of that. But at the same time, that we take on a responsibility as a country to protect all cultures, right, and defend the rights of all cultures. But at the same time, we also have to preserve and encourage an Australian identity, right? So to me, what's going on at the moment is we are abandoning certain groups, certain cultures within the country, or and yet, hang on, we signed ourselves up to basically protect everybody. To me, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And I think that's the role for the government here, is to recognise that through those policies of multiculturalism and otherwise, and as Australian citizens writ large, we have a responsibility as a government and as a people to make sure that we are equally representing and equally looking after and preserving and protecting everybody's safety and welfare and all the rest of it, and interests. And there's a degree of control that the government, I think, needs to take place about things that happen arguably back in the old country, for want of a better term, and how much that does or doesn't influence the behaviours and actions and lifestyles, but more important, the safety and welfare of people who have become Australian citizens through immigration to this country. And there's a line crossing there, and there have been lines crossed in my view at the moment. And that's concerning. It doesn't matter which side you want to be on, but the argument to me is we have a situation here at the moment where arguably not all cultures, I guess, etc., and groups are being represented in this country in terms of their safety and welfare and their well-being and their interests are equally being looked after. And that's a worry. I mean, the fact that people have to have security guards to take their kids to certain schools for their safety, and all the fact that people can't walk around and feel safe in their own suburbs, and that's when they're shopping and stuff. I mean, what kind of country have we become? That is the case. But
what was the changing point, mate, in your mind? So I'm trying to think back, over the decades of, was there a definitive moment in time when I guess the culture and the beliefs in this country changed?
Well, look, I think there's been a slow move. I don't think there's any doubt that the October 7 situation has given rise to its rapid sort of elevation in profile. And I think it's both Hamas's attack, but also the IDF response. I don't think that's I don't think we can walk away from it. The scope and scale of the response is significant. But then again, the scale of the attack and the atrocities that occurred therein are significant, the amount of headlines it got and all the rest of it. So I think that's given rise to it at the moment, plus the government sort of posturing on it and response. There was a missed opportunity, I think, at the Sydney Opera House rally to sort of take a stand there to basically get control of the narrative, to make sure that things didn't sort of go down a path that was undesirable. But I think that opportunity was missed. And of course, it's being stoked at the moment because of the scope and scale of both infrastructure and loss of life and all the rest of it, which is, as I said earlier, one shot or the loss of one life is too many, right, in any conflict. The solution is not easy, but it's also not our solution to resolve. It's not up to Australia to resolve the situation in the Middle East, same as it's not up to Australia on its own to resolve the climate issue in the globe. We're very good, it seems, and we want to, when it suits, take responsibility for global challenges and a whole range of things that aren't arguably within the remit of ourselves, and yet domestically we've got enough stuff that we could get to work on to look after our own interests, our own welfare, and which require attention at the moment. I would say not getting it. But
Why would you say that is, mate? It's almost like little man syndrome that we just need to be jumping up and down to be heard.
Yeah.
And like you said, we're not looking after our own backyard. We've got no sovereign capability here to do anything other than grow food. I just don't understand, and I get it. Obviously, the geopolitical circumstances, we need to be seen as being strong in the region. But like you said, when are we going to start looking after our own backyard?
Yeah. Oh, well, and when are we going to look out? When are we going to be more interested in things that directly influence us? So, the US election is really quite important to us. As John Howard said recently, the two candidates are awful. And that's arguable, of course, and everyone's got a view on both candidates, and pretty strong ones at that. But the reality is, it means potentially quite a bit of difference to us as a country as to who becomes the president. The risk for us with a Democrat victory for Harris is a continuance of policies that, in a defence setting and security sense, would put a lot of things for us at risk, in terms of the amount of spending. I mean, there's been a decline in spending in US defence through the Biden administration. There would definitely be I think it would be fair to say there'd be a continuance of that under a Harris administration. She has already, I think, given indicators that would suggest that would be the line that you and that wouldn't be unexpected, but that puts things like the AUKUS question at risk in terms of funding and all the rest of it. There's a lot of pressure domestically at home about the US capacity for submarine production and all the rest of it. It all sounds pretty simple to the layman that arguably, all we were asking for in the AUKUS mix was, for 3 submarines as part of the production line, over the coming decades. But that's a significant capability right there. And so it was a significant question for Congress and so forth. And at the time, it wouldn't have surprised me if Congress had knocked back the proposal on the basis, if nothing else, of saying, well, what has Australia done to give us the confidence that they're committed to this thing? I mean, that's the question for us. I mean, at that stage, not a sort of soil had turned on the eastern seaboard. We couldn't provide one major fleet unit to support a US-led sort of peace response to piracy peace with the Houthis on the premise that we just didn't have all the necessary capabilities that could deal with the threat in that environment. Those things were pretty disturbing, not the least for the Americans who were starting to ask questions. I mean, for me, one of the most difficult things I heard in the last 12 months was an American colleague say to me, "You guys are getting a bit like your counterparts to your southeast. We're not even sure we want to listen to your promises." And that's a bit of a risk, and I guess that's disturbing because for one thing in our history with the Americans, I think reliability has always featured quite highly there for us and them in our relationship, that no matter what, and despite a lot of talk, we have always been able to be relied upon in their eyes to be able to make some sort of contribution, do something of significance to help the effort or within our capacity, etc. But to suggest through that conversation at the time that maybe we can't be relied upon, that to me is a significant concern, not the least of which if that's what the attitude is from our major alliance partner.
We're in trouble. Well, that is really concerning. I know you and I have spoken about it before. And you mentioned that the US will never take their eye off the Indo Pacific again. They made that mistake. It's taken a long time to get back in here. They've got a lot of interest in the region, so it benefits them to have a presence here.